on Jeremiah chapter 3, I want you to look at verse 22. 3:22 says, "But I say to them, return, O wayward." Shovavim. The word shovavim means wayward. Now, last week we started with a understanding of the Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, the 10 Commandments. Well, then this is the last of the 6 weeks that have led into this. This is a culmination of those 6 weeks. And the 6 weeks have been dealing with the wayward people, because all of Israel has been wayward. God is now bringing them back, those who are interested. And so they now come, Gentiles with them. They've arrived at Mount Sinai, and at Mount Sinai, the 10 Commandments were given. So we're reaching a critical mass. I also want to have you now go back in your Bibles to the last section, which was Exodus, and I want you to look at chapter 20. Some of you have already been with me, so you know what's coming next. For those who don't, I pray for you so that you can survive this. But I want you to look at chapter 20, which is the beginning of the section in Yitro. This is Jethro's section. And in chapter 20, we're actually going to be dealing with 10 Commandments themselves. Okay, so Exodus 20, and I want you to look at verse 1. Verse 1. Now notice it's very short. It's God spoke all these statements saying. God spoke all these statements saying. I want you to notice two things. First off, he's using spoke and say in the same sentence. Wouldn't it seem rather crazy to use the same word twice or use that same idea twice? Well, it was for the longest time, but eventually, I think it was Rashi who began to understand that the word we're looking at, and the Vilna Gaon gave it an even better word. At this point in time, what he said was, what we're looking at is acknowledgement. So God spoke all these statements acknowledging. Acknowledging what? What is it that he's acknowledging? Well, that's the point of what's happening in this chapter. Chapter 20 deals with the 10 Commandments. Notice it only speaks to the 10 Commandments here. So the question is, what happened to the other 603 commandments? Are they not important? Why does he only deal with 10? Well, the answer is he was only given permission to express those 10 at that moment in time. When we come to Mishpatim, he's going to give us another set of commandments that we're supposed to know. Now, prior, when we were in the chapter of them leaving, remember, Bo dealt with the idea of we're going to have a new first month. That was a commandment that was given. Also, there were commandments given along the way dealing with the ashes of the red heifer or the yellow or the red cow. And lots of other commandments were given, but they're only, well, they're not even mentioned because they're going to come up later. Moses is only going to tell the people what they need to know then, not what they're going to know later on, but what they know then. And what is important? What are the details for the 10 Commandments? That comes in this section called Mishpatim. Now, the word Mishpatim means ordinances. So we're going to be looking at ordinances at this particular point in time. But I want to teach you something secret. I don't know if you can read Hebrew or you know in your Hebrew Bible where 20 verse 1 actually is. Now, I'm not asking you to read it, but I want you to go to the first line. Now, the first line begins with the letter Vav, Yud, Dalet, Bet, Resh. Can you see it? Now, that first line has 28 letters in it. Hebrew is not a language of just simply words. It's a language of numbers, and numbers play a significant role. So if we look at this, we see that there are 28 letters in this line. 28 letters. And if we go back, we can count, we'll count 7 different words. Now, I wasn't great in math, but I could divide 7 into 48, and I knew I was coming up with 4. So I have a ratio of 1 to 4. Well, what does 4 tell me or talk to me about? 4 talks to me about the special name of God, Hashem. Now, if you could read it in Hebrew, you would find out that as you're reading through this, you would divide the sentence by your voice into 2 parts. And each part contains 14 letters. Now, if you knew Hebrew, you would know that the value of 14 is the word yad, hand. So in the beginning, God's hands were making these statements. He talks with his hands, not really, because he has no hands. The concept is the fact that he is expressing himself. He's leaning into his conversation. He's talking to us. Now, I want you to go back to Genesis 1 and find something else that's happening. Again, we're going to go to the right side because you already know the left side is in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So we're only going to talk about the first line. And the first line, as you begin to read, you'll find out that it has 28 letters. Not only that, it has 7 words. And not only that, when you speak it, it divides itself evenly into 2 phrases. And not only that, it has 14 letters in each phrase. Now, is it a coincidence? Does God make such a thing a coincidence? You see, the first rabbis not only read their text, but they did the mathematics of their text, because letters are numbers and numbers are letters. And so they found a second set of values when they can find the same number of letters and the same number of words and coming up with the same kind of ideas. You now have for yourself what appears to be more than a coincidence. Now, you and I both know that the first sentence deals with the creation story. Well, I want to tell you that chapter 20 deals with the second creation. You see, God is now going to create a spiritual world, or attempt to. And in that spiritual world, he's going to have 10 commandments. Oh, time out again. How many statements does God make in Genesis, the first chapter? 10. 10 statements, 10 commandments, 28 letters, 14. All of it's the same. So the first chapter is the physical creation. But here in chapter 20, we're going to get the spiritual creation. God is going to attempt to reintroduce the idea that he first gave to Adam. You remember, Adam fumbled at first, but this is not a fumble by Adam, because you're seeing Adam means ish, means man. And Moses was a man, an ish. But as we go through our story, we find out that Moses was trying to marry Israel to God. And what happened? Before he could get down with the commandments, with the betrothal agreement, Israel was already sinning. And before he wanted to have a divorce, he simply smashed the stones. And at that point in time, the possibility of starting over again perfectly from the days of Adam were gone. Now he sent down, if you look at it, he sent down a second set of commandments. Because if you read Deuteronomy, you know that the commandments are not the same in Deuteronomy as they are here. If you were able to count, you would count 88 more letters. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, 88 speaks of a flow, a river. God was flowing blessings down to Israel, and he continues to do that. Well, we call it Shefa, but it's cut off right now because there is no clear path for what God is sending to us today. Because you see, there is no temple. Without the temple, there is no way. So imagine what's going on. We also read that first chapter, and it's Elohim. the God of nature, the God of judgment. But again, we have within it a secret. You see, the word Elohim, God of judgment, is written 26 times. 26 is also the number that's used to describe the tetragrammaton, Hashem, the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, the special name. God hid himself in this first chapter. He hid his mercy behind things, light and dark, water, clouds, air, anything he could put in his way. Finally, he created man. But man couldn't see him, could only know he was there. Remember, Adam didn't know he was there until he heard the footsteps and he heard the voice. But he had been there all the time. So God is a God of mercy, but he's also a hidden God. So when we look at our two stories, we're looking at creation in a physical sense, and we're now looking at creation in a spiritual sense. God is starting over. Now, all of us who are Gentiles have been given the 7 laws of Noah to follow. I want to tell you there are really more than 7 laws, because the 7 laws break down just like everything else. What constitutes murder? What constitutes theft? As you look at it, you're going to find out there are many ways that people steal. There are many ways that people can kill, and they're not all physical. There's the accidents. All of those are dealt with in the 7 laws. But you see, we don't see the corollaries, but we'll find them here in today's lesson. They're all there. So as we begin to look at what's going on, we're going to look at something that is rather, well, I think it's fascinating, to be very honest with you. And as I go through, I want to share a PowerPoint with you. If I hope I can get it to the screen. That's not it. It's not there. How do I find it? Okay, let me see if I can get it this way. Now you can't see that, can you? Well, last time it worked out. How did I get it last time? Well,
can you see your selection of screens there to select from? You got to pick the one your slides are in.
But it's not coming through to you. And this is sad that I'm going through this process again, because I did it so well the last time. I thought, well, there's no way that I'm going to have a problem, but there is.
Am I going to have your wife teach from here on out?
You could, except she's probably going to be scared, afraid to do so.
At least she'd know how to work the technology, wouldn't she? I thought she was much.
No, because she's as old as I.
Oh, you better start teaching.
I'm gonna, yeah. As soon as I started that sentence, I could see Mike's face, and I knew I was in trouble.
Nope, so don't do it.
So, okay. Now what do you see?
Ah, there we go. Beautiful.
Okay. So what we're going to look at then is the slides. And so in the slides, I'm going to show the show. And so we're going to look from the beginning. Okay. So I'm sharing my screen with you, and somehow it went way ahead of me.
Oh, there you go.
All right. Mishpatim. Again, Mishpatim is about 100 plus laws that are written for us or given to us so that we can understand what's going on. And by that, I mean that these laws are basic laws. It's not the laws dealing with the Sabbath. It's not the laws dealing with kosher foods. It's not those laws that, well, if the rabbis would have written it, this would have been a whole spiritual section instead of a practical down-to-earth section of laws. But God wanted to give us the practicality first, and then he will grow into the more difficult, but he always does it in relationship to what the Torah text is dealing with. We haven't got any of the laws dealing with the tabernacle. We won't get until later will we get the laws on kosher. And the law of Shabbat technically came to us but the details are still hidden. So as we go through this, we're going to find that there's something special here. Now, one of the things that's about these laws, there was somebody who wrote laws before, way ahead of us. He wrote his laws, 282 of them. They're laws and they're regulations, and they're called the Hammurabi Code. Now you can see in the picture, the stela. The stela that you're looking at is 7 foot, 2 inches tall. It's in the museum, the Louvre. On the right-hand side, what you're looking at is the petroglyphs. This is the writing, the Akkadian language that would be understood. There are 44 columns involved in this whole thing, and they basically go through an understanding of what is what as far as the 288. Now, as you look at it again, one of the things that's going to happen, this is what we're looking at. To enforce his rules, Hammurabi collected all the laws of Babylon in a code that would apply everywhere in the land. So the laws were not just specifically to that city. They were not just specifically to farmers. They were not specifically to priests. They were the general laws that covered everything. They would be equivalent to what we today call our Constitution. That's where these laws are, and the Bill of Rights that's added to it. Now, the word Hammurabi up there is a very fascinating word, because you see Hammurabi, well, it was the king, we think, during the days of Abraham. Now, in the days of Abraham, Hammurabi wasn't called Hammurabi. We know him better by what name? Nimrod. Hammurabi and Nimrod are probably the same person. They lived at the very same period in time in which Abraham lived. Abraham lived in the Ur of Chaldees, which is part of the Mesopotamian area. Hammurabi ruled all of that area. Now, we know that Nimrod and Abraham had a disagreement about statues and gods, which was later resolved because Abraham was thrown into the fiery furnace, which is part of the Hammurabic Code, which is a rather fascinating thing. Now, in the beginning, Hammurabi only had one city that belonged to him. That city was Babylon. Not only that, he warred with neighboring nations. And as he warred with neighboring nations, he expanded his empire until he included all of the Mesopotamian Valley. By the word Mesopotamia means between the rivers, between the Euphrates and the Tigris. He owned all that land, which constituted what? How many different countries? Iran or Iraq, Syria, parts of Lebanon, all of that area, Turkey included. Now, this code of 282 laws were just placed on a pillar. The pillar that you're looking at was uncovered in 1901. Now, if you notice on the top of the pillar, you'll find two characters. The first one on the left, that is Hammurabi. The person on the right is Shamash, the sun god. Now, Hammurabi is receiving the code of laws from the sun god. Hammurabi stone includes basically authority because of the statue. He saw it as a divine set of laws. They were societal. Punishments were to fit the crimes, as people must be responsible for their own actions. That's the way he ruled. So Hammurabi is not quite the evil character we've always presented him to be. In fact, many times in the texts And we have basically 45 stone tablets that belong to Hammurabi that he actually had printed, in which on many of them he is considered to be righteous. On one, he's considered to be a hunter, which again goes back to the Bible where Nimrod was said to be a hunter. The Hammurabi Code was the original concept of an eye for an eye, which is part of today's lesson. And it's going to be, excuse me, one of those things that I want to talk to you about and try to share with you some understandings. Now, the text says, if a son struck his father, the son's hand would be cut off. Rather gruesome, but I imagine there wouldn't be a whole lot of striking dad. Finally, consequences for crimes depended on the rank in your society. Now, if you were a noble, the sentences would be lighter. I believe that's what's going on in Washington today. But anyway, back to the story. The story is that the crimes depended on who you were. If you were a slave, you had no rights, and therefore the punishments were always the most severe. So Hammurabi's code is a very important item. So what's in the code? Some of Hammurabi's laws, I said, are barbaric. Again, if you're selling stolen property or a building collapses and it kills somebody, you are punished by death. A slave who denies his master's authority, his ear is amputated. But there are others that suggest that are marginal, and it says the fact that of alimony. Can you imagine? Back in those days, they had alimony. Divorce was common. And so alimony was established on the code. That's what they dealt with. The code also depicted in their system courtrooms, how things were to be handled, who does what. In fact, it was important to understand you are innocent until proven guilty. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's part of the Hammurabi codes. And this was done in the time of Abraham. So I can understand where Abraham had many of these laws already impressed in him. God would have had to tweak the ones that were a little bit offensive. Now, this eye for an eye is actually found 3 places in the Bible. It's here in chapter 21, verses 23 to 24. It's in Leviticus 24 to 20. And it's in Deuteronomy 19:21. All have basically the same meaning. And we'll get to that as we go along. But I just wanted to give you that idea. Oh, here's 2 more laws that you might want to understand. I took it from a cartoon, but anyway, it works out. It basically says what should be done about a wife who ignores her duties and belittles her husband. I thought this was appropriate. So that's why I put it on here. It says in Code 143, if a woman has not been careful, but has gadded about, neglecting her house and belittling her husband, they shall throw that woman in the river. I thought that was appropriate, except there's no river around here. So I guess I have to work beside myself. Another one, what should be done if an adopted parent, or if a parent wants to take back the child that was given away in adoption? We thank Shamash and we make sure that the kid doesn't look like his real father. That was what they were saying. But the understanding is that this is going to be very difficult. This is the screen I really wanted to show you. So I want you to really think about eye for an eye. Now, if you can read Hebrew, you're really thinking of 3 words: ein, takat, ein. Eye for an eye. Ein is the word for eye. Takat is the word for. Eye for eye is the way it would read. Now, what I'm about to talk to you about is what we call a notricone. A notricone is a way of revisiting a word and finding what's called a permutation, another word that fits with what's going on. So in this particular case, now remember, this is talking about the Bible. This is dealing with the understanding of what an eye for an eye truly means. Oh, by the way, Hammurabi's code, Hammurabi himself is on the wall of the Supreme Court. He is one of the legal judges that have been placed on that, on the wall, south wall, as you enter into the building. That's trivia. Back to the story. The word for eye in Hebrew is ein. And ein is spelled, and I don't know if you can see it, with the letter ein, a yud, and a nun. Now, the Vilna Gaon noticed that these letters following, or if the letters were written on one above the other, what you would get would be something special. So let's go through. If we're looking at the letter ein right here, the 16th letter of the alphabet, and you look one in front, you find the letter samek. Samek. Now, when you go to the word yud, or the letter yud, that's the 10th letter. The letter in front of it is tet. Now, if you go to the letter kaf, kaf is the 11th letter. And as the 11th letter, what you actually have then is the idea of a yud. Now you have three new letters. You have a kaf, you have a fe or pei, and you have a samek. That's a word in Hebrew. And the word is silver. The word is silver. So an eye for eye in our Bible is talking about monetary damages. It's not about taking somebody else's eye out. That's a Muslim version of it. The Bible is telling us that a person who loses their sight deserves monetary payment. Now, how does that look? Well, how should it look? If we begin to think about this in a logical way, one of the things that you should begin to understand is that a jeweler needs his eyes worse than a farmer. Not that a farmer doesn't need his sight, but if he has only one eye, he can still plow, he can still harvest, he can still do a lot of things. If a jeweler loses an eye, imagine how easy it is not to cut a diamond correctly. Imagine how easy it is to find yourself out of sorts, unable to do your job. So if a diamond cutter loses his sight, he should be paid more than a farmer. But how much more? Well, it should be based upon, and it is according to the system and according to the Tanakh, or not the Tanakh, but to the Talmud, it's based on the fact of how many years, how much experience are we paying for, how long will his career last? Figuring those three together, one should come up with a dollar amount. And the same thing holds true with a farmer. So the younger the farmer, the more he should be paid. The older the farmer, he's reaching the point where he's no longer in the business, he should be paid less. It's a system that's been established way back in Bible times. It's part of their oral understanding of the eye for an eye. Hopefully you get an understanding of what we're talking about. I want to talk to you now about something special. Now, I told you about Shovavim. Shovavim were the first 6 chapters. Shovavim also begins what is a 4-week period leading up to Purim. We're now beginning the process of preparing for Purim. Purim is a day, but what we're talking about is a practice that one goes through. It's the reading of the Torah portions plus Haftorahs. Now, the Haftorahs that you're going to get are going to deal with what's called Parsha Shekalim. Shekalim is about the shekel. So in this chapter that we're in, they talk about the half shekel. The half shekel then becomes the subject that's going to be covered each and every week in preparation. Why are you going to cover a half shekel? I mean, at this particular point in time, the half shekel, there is no need for a half shekel because there's no tabernacle, there's no temple, there's no reason for them to dealing with sacrifices. So therefore, your half shekel is not going towards purchases of a building or purchases of animals, livestock, to sacrifice at that building. But it's important because it commemorates something. And what it commemorates is the most important thing of all. You see, when the people arrived at Mount Sinai, they were one. The singular is used as Moses talks with the people before he goes up the mountain. The people were one at that point in time. Now, the half shekel that's going to be used is a way of counting individuals, those males of age. Those were the ones who paid into it. So the half shekel was given by all the men for the purpose of livestock. Now, Rashi would tell you that this is given in the desert, but it was given for a future, because you see this half shekel is going to speak of Haman and what's going to happen then. Because you know, Purim is about the idea that Israel is about to be annihilated by Haman, who is an Amalekite, one who dislikes totally. Now, every action that a Jew does today should come from the Torah, and there's a symbolic understanding that's far deeper, and it's especially true with respect to Purim. The half shekel is this good example of the fact that, first off, when a church goes through a building campaign, the pastor or whoever usually goes to the wealthiest givers. And he hits them up first, and then he goes through the rest of the congregation. But he first off goes to the givers. The system of the half shekel, there is no difference between the rich and the poor. Everybody contributes. Everybody contributes the same amount. Everyone who is of age. It wasn't the money God was after. It was the idea that he wanted to solicit from everyone. When you and I give our money to someone or to some event or to some charity, we are giving something of ourselves. We're investing ourselves in that event. That's what the half shekel was about, investing my oneness into the community. Now, in order to make sure everybody had that half shekel, for the 4 weeks prior to this needed collection, which was on the 1st of Nisan, before that happened, those 4 days, one was responsible in a notice hung from wherever that would be publicly viewed. Remember, on the 1st of Nisan, you owe your half shekel. Everybody had that same message. So they all received this message. It's really unprecedented, but the idea is it creates a single person with a single heart. It's about humility. It's about advancement. Now, the underlying thing is little really unifies people better than a common investment. There's no competition. There's just partnership. That's what it's all about. And so that's what our story is about. Now, in the days of Haman and Purim, oh, by the way, maybe I should tell you. You remember that stela, that statue, Hammurabi statue? It was found in Susa. Do you remember where Susa is? Susa was the capital city of the Persian Empire. It's the city in which Ahasuerus ruled. It's the city where Esther became queen. Mordecai became a great advisor, and Haman was hung. Imagine that city. That's where they found the codes. Now, it's important to understand then that the Jewish people, know it or not, were contributing to an event, because you see, when they were in exile, they still had to contribute a half shekel. Where did the half shekel go? In a particular cases, if you were still in the land, it went to a common place located in Jerusalem. Otherwise, it was taken in by the leader of that community. And all of these half shekels were constantly collected. How they got together, if they did even get together, is not known by me. But what I do understand is the fact that they continued to do it. They continued to build into their bank oneness. That's what was going on. Now, we know the story. Can you take it with you? Right? We all are familiar with that line. Well, I want to give you another line. It came from Rabbi Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, who's called the Kosher Rabbi. He was a very spiritual man. In fact, much of what he did was epic. It was beyond. In fact, his writings and his students became famous worldwide. But one of the things that he was famous for was going back to the book of Kohelets. You remember the book of Kohelets, Ecclesiastes, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. Remember that? Well, one of the things that he learned was the fact that there was a section in there dealing with you can't take it with you. But there was one case when it could. Now, there's a word that I would like you to know, and that's the word tilve. Tilve. It's spelled tav, lamed, vav, hey. It means to lend. When a person was in need of money, he was supposed to be able to go to one who has wealth and borrow from him. In other words, the wealthy man would lend to one who is less fortunate. But I want to say there was more to the story than that, because you see, when I looked at that same word spelled exactly the same way, tav, lamed, vav, hey, but the vowels were different. Tilava, which means to escort. One who lends without expecting a what do you want to call it? More than what he lent back, interest. One who lends that way is, though he's parting with his money, but he's also escorting himself to the world to come. It's the one time when you can take it with you. Now, not much more is worthwhile than to be a partner, a communal partner, a partner in the offerings, a partner in the world to come. All of that's important. I take it from that, I want to stop sharing and go back to everybody seeing me. It's important that we understand that there's more to life, but the problem is the fact that life is so daily. Sometimes we forget our responsibility in the world. Our responsibility is for each other. That's the one thing that we should have. The one thing that NETIV calls for, or I think that's what Rod's asking, is for us to become one. Asking for us to join together, to work together for God. Now, my part today is just simply to teach. We give, but the important thing is that we're working towards a world to come. Each and every one of us, we have our things that we do, things that are important, but nothing is more important than the world to come and helping us reach the point where the Messiah will come. So we will get there. Okay, I've talked at you for 48 minutes now. Hopefully there's something there that you can take with you and keep in your minds, hold on to. But Mishpatim is, well, it's too large. You can't cover it all. So I just simply picked some small points and gave you those. And hopefully if you can't remember it all, you might want to go back and listen to me again. Although I can't hardly listen to me a second time, but you can probably be better than I am at doing that. But the understanding is that there's more for us to do. And it starts with being one. I quit. Anybody have something that they have been meditating on or thinking about or want a question about?